Imagine a billionaire yelling at a black waitress in a packed fancy restaurant. But then with just one calm sentence, she stops him dead in his tracks. What she said didn't just silence him. It shook everyone watching. Stay tuned to hear the powerful words that froze the entire room. Before diving into the story, comment where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss the latest stories. It was a Saturday night in New York City, and the lights never seemed to dim. Outside, the streets buzzed with yellow taxis, fashionistas, and the echo of distant horns. But inside Velvet and Oak, one of Manhattan's most prestigious and expensive restaurants, a different kind of buzz filled the air. The sound of clinking glasses, low conversations, and the subtle melodies of a live jazz trio playing near the fireplace. Velvet and Oak wasn't just a place to eat, it was a statement. The kind of place where celebrities dined in dark corners, business moguls sealed multi-million-dollar deals, and old money whispered secrets over vintage Bordeaux. Reservations had to be made weeks in advance. The wine list was so thick it had its own table of contents. And the staff? Trained to perfection. Every smile timed, every step measured, every nod calculated. By 8 p.m., the restaurant was full. Waiters glided through the maze of tables like dancers, delivering handcrafted plates with artistic precision. The low golden lighting cast warm glows across silk dresses and sharp suits. It was the kind of place where time felt slower, where every detail mattered. Then, just after 8:03 p.m., everything shifted. The heavy double doors at the entrance opened with a soft thud. Heads turned. Conversations faltered. The pianist paused for a fraction of a second before continuing. He had arrived. Gregory Langston. Even before his name was whispered, you could feel the atmosphere tighten. Like cold air sweeping into a warm room, Gregory wasn't just rich, he was legendary. A billionaire hedge fund titan with a face that had graced the cover of Forbes more than once. The founder and CEO of Langston Capital, a man known as much for his business genius as for his volcanic temper. To Wall Street, he was a god. To service workers, he was a nightmare. Tall, lean, and sharply dressed in a black tailored suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. Gregory walked like he owned the ground beneath his feet. A silver pocket square peeked from his jacket. His black dress shoes clicked confidently on the marble floor with each step. His salt and pepper hair was slicked back, every strand in place. On his wrist shimmered a platinum watch, rare, custom-made, and immediately recognizable to those who cared about such things. He didn't smile. He didn't need to. His presence alone demanded attention. The maitre d', a man usually calm under pressure, practically sprinted to greet him. "Mr. Langston, welcome back, sir. Your table is prepared." Gregory gave a curt nod, barely acknowledging him. "Of course it is. No thank you, no pleasantries. Just control." As he was guided to his usual spot, the private corner booth, with the best view of the room, the staff subtly sprang into high alert. You could see it in the way the busboys stood straighter, in the sudden urgency behind the bar, in the manager's quick whisper into his headset. "Table 9, VIP, make no mistakes." They dealt with Gregory before, and once was enough to remember him forever. He was the kind of customer who sent food back twice just to test the chef's patience, who asked for drinks to be exactly 42 degrees, who once told a sommelier that the bottle they served was embarrassingly peasant-like, and that was on a $900 Merlot. Every waiter dreaded being assigned to him. Except tonight the task fell to someone who didn't flinch so easily, Tamara Williams. At 28 years old, Tamara was one of the restaurant's most respected waitresses. She wasn't just good, and she was graceful under fire. With soft brown eyes, deep dimples, and a voice that soothed even the pickiest guests, she had mastered the art of service. More importantly, she knew how to read people. She could sense a storm before the clouds gathered. Tamara had worked at Velvet and Oak for 5 years. She knew the floor plan like the back of her hand. She remembered regulars' favorite wines, anniversaries, even allergies. Her coworkers admired her. The chef trusted her. And the manager often said, if I had 10 Tamaras, I could run this place in my sleep. But even she couldn't hide the moment of hesitation when she saw Gregory's name on her docket. Table 9, the host whispered, eyes wide. It's him. Tamara glanced at the corner booth. There he was, already seated, checking his phone. No eye contact, no smile. She exhaled slowly, straightened her posture, and smiled. Not because she had to, but because that's who she was. She adjusted her apron and said calmly, I've got it. As she picked up the wine list and stepped toward the table, the room almost seemed to hold its breath, because everyone knew what could happen next. They'd seen Gregory explode over a slightly chipped glass. They'd watched him berate a hostess because the tablecloth had a wrinkle. Tonight, any small misstep, a missing fork, a too slow refill, a word out of place, could ignite a scene. And tonight, fate had placed Tamara, a black woman who had worked twice as hard to earn half as much recognition, directly in his path. The room didn't know it yet, but it was about to witness a moment no one would forget. Tamara approached Gregory's table with the grace of someone who'd been through far worse and handled it with dignity. Her steps were smooth, her back straight, her voice calm. Good evening, sir, she said warmly, offering the wine menu with a practiced smile. May I get you started with a drink tonight? Gregory didn't even look at her. He stared blankly at the screen of his phone, thumb scrolling lazily, his mouth in a tight line. A few awkward seconds passed, enough for Tamara to feel the heat of nearby glances on her skin. Finally, he spoke, but not with kindness. I've been sitting here for 5 minutes, he snapped without looking up. Where the hell is my water? The tone hit like a slap. Tamara blinked, once, but she didn't flinch. Her voice remained calm, professional, as if this wasn't the first time she'd been spoken to like that. I apologize, sir, she said gently. I'll get that for you right away. She turned to walk toward the bar. But before she could take 2 steps, Gregory raised his voice again. You people are always so slow. Is this how you work? No wonder nothing gets done. The words were louder, sharper, and just like that, the restaurant went still. It was like someone had flipped a switch. The clinking of cutlery stopped. The low hum of conversation died. Even the pianist's fingers slowed on the keys. Every head turned, some subtly, others openly. Diners looked at one another, eyebrows raised. Waiters paused mid-step. Everyone had heard it. You people. Those 2 words echoed louder than the rest. Tamara stood frozen for a brief moment. She didn't turn around. She didn't respond. But her back straightened just a bit more before she calmly resumed walking to the bar. Her movements were graceful, controlled. But her fingers trembled just slightly as she reached for a chilled glass. Behind the bar, the bartender, a tall guy named Miguel, gave her a glance. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. His eyes asked the question, You okay? Tamara gave a small nod, just enough to say, I've got this. She returned to the table with the water, setting it down gently, without a word. The smile was still on her face, but if you looked closely, you could see the cracks forming. The corners of her mouth trembled. Her eyes were darker now. Gregory barely acknowledged the glass. I'll have the porterhouse steak, he said, without emotion. Rare. And don't mess it up. Tamara nodded, jotting down the order with her usual precision. Of course, sir, she said, but something had shifted. Something was building beneath the surface. It wasn't anger. It wasn't even pain. It was something deeper, older, the kind of pressure that only comes from 1,000 small insults carried over years, from customers, from bosses, from strangers who felt entitled to disrespect you because they thought your name tag made you invisible. Tamara turned and walked toward the kitchen, but this time every step she took carried the weight of those words. Not just what Gregory had said, but the fact that he'd said it loudly, publicly, as if it were normal, as if it were okay. And that's when it happened. A woman seated near the window whispered to her husband, Did you hear what he said? Another, Man seated at the bar muttered under his breath, "Unbelievable." A few guests shook their heads in disbelief. Others sat frozen, unsure whether to look away or keep watching. It was as if the entire restaurant had been yanked into the moment with her, forced to bear witness to the kind of thing most people like to pretend doesn't happen anymore. Q. The kitchen. Tamara handed off the order, then leaned briefly against the wall trying to steady her breathing. She wasn't new to this. She'd been disrespected before, spoken down to, ignored. But this time felt different, because this time, it wasn't just a private insult, it was a public moment. It was loud, humiliating, dehumanizing, and everyone had heard it. She looked in the mirror above the prep counter. She adjusted her posture, tucked a loose curl behind her ear. She could feel the sting in her chest, but she wouldn't let it break her. Tamara walked back toward Gregory's table with a fresh glass of water, even though he hadn't asked for another. It was part of the job. Stay attentive, stay ahead. But as she approached, her mind wasn't on refills anymore. It was on dignity, and in that moment something inside her clicked. Not out of rage, but clarity. She realized that no amount of money, no designer suit, no power could excuse what Gregory had just done, and she was no longer going to let it slide. Not tonight. Not in front of everyone. As she reached the table and set down the fresh water, Gregory glanced at her again, this time with mild irritation. He clearly expected her to stay silent, to keep smiling, to shrink. But she didn't. Not anymore. She straightened up and looked him directly in the eye. The whole restaurant was still watching. What she was about to say would freeze the entire room. Dinner was served. The porterhouse steak, seared on the outside, warm and pink inside, was plated with roasted garlic, hand-cut fries, and a touch of rosemary. The chef had personally ensured it was prepared exactly to specification. The server placed it gently in front of Gregory Langston. He didn't say thank you. He barely glanced at the food. He picked up his fork, stabbed the steak with unnecessary force, and tore off a chunk. The room watched from the corners of their eyes, holding their breath, sensing what might come next. One bite, that's all it took. Gregory slammed his fork down with a loud metallic clang that echoed across the room like a gunshot. A few guests flinched. "This isn't rare," he shouted, loud enough for the back tables to hear. "Are you blind?" Tamara was nearby, checking on another table. She turned instantly, composed, and walked back to him. Her smile was softer, now but still intact. "I can ask the chef to prepare another, sir," she said, voice steady. But Gregory wasn't interested in solutions. He wanted control. He stood up, fast. The table shook. His voice climbed. "No, I want you to go back there and explain to the chef how not to ruin a $120 steak, or is that too hard for you?" Gasps weren't spoken. They were felt, like invisible waves moving through the room. Conversations stopped. Glasses hovered mid-air. Couples froze. One man dropped his napkin and didn't bother to pick it up. Even the bartender leaned forward. Hands paused on a shaker, eyes locked on table 9. Tamara stood her ground. She didn't speak. Not yet. Her eyes scanned his face, calculating. She saw the anger, yes. But underneath that, the arrogance, the entitlement, the belief that power gave him the right to humiliate others for sport. And then Gregory went too far. He leaned in slightly, smirking, voice low but loud enough to carry across the restaurant. "Maybe this job's the best you'll ever do," he said. "You're lucky someone like me even talks to you." The silence that followed was total. No jazz music, no chatter. Just stunned, hollow stillness. Even the kitchen doors, which swung open and shut every 30 seconds, now stayed closed, as if the whole building itself had stopped to witness what was unfolding. Tamara stood still, hands at her sides. No tray. No pen. Just her, face to face with a man who had just tried to tear her dignity to shreds in front of an entire room. And then, she lifted her head, looked Gregory dead in the eye. There was no smile now, no pretense. Just calm, controlled truth, and she said in a voice so clear it cut through every corner of the room, "I serve food, not egos." It wasn't loud, but it didn't need to be. The words landed like a lightning strike. You could feel the ripple they created. From one end of the restaurant to the other, someone near the bar whispered, "Whoa." An elderly woman near the fireplace lowered her wine glass slowly. A teenage busboy standing by the service door blinked, stunned. Even Gregory froze. For a split second his face went blank, like his brain couldn't process that someone had actually stood up to him. Then the color in his face changed. Red. Furious. Embarrassed. But before he could respond, before he could throw out another insult or demand someone be fired, the restaurant manager appeared. Daniel Cho, a slim, sharply dressed man who had worked hospitality for 20 years, stepped beside Tamara, his voice calm but firm. "Mr. Langston," he said, "we've respected you as a guest, but I won't allow my staff to be disrespected." Gregory blinked. "Are you serious right now?" he barked. "Do you know who I am?" "Yes," Daniel replied. "But tonight, you've forgotten who we are." The weight of those words hit, even harder than Tamara's, because now it wasn't just her. It was the entire establishment standing behind her. Gregory looked around, hoping to find a face of support in the crowd. But he didn't. People were staring at him, not with fear or admiration, but with disgust. A woman in a red dress shook her head slowly. A man in a tux leaned to his date and whispered, "He deserved that." And then something incredible happened. One person clapped, just one, then another, and another, soft at first, then louder. Within seconds, half the restaurant was applauding, not for drama, not for spectacle, for Tamara. She didn't smile, she didn't bow. She simply nodded, collected, and walked away from the table with quiet grace. Gregory stood alone, the billionaire, used to controlling rooms, crushing deals, and commanding. Respect with his wallet had just been humbled by one sentence, one waitress, one moment of undeniable truth. He didn't shout again. He didn't demand the manager be fired. He just grabbed his coat and stormed out. The only sound behind him was the echo of that sentence still hanging in the air like gospel. "I serve food, not egos." And just like that, the restaurant exhaled. The music resumed. Conversations returned. But something had changed. Everyone had witnessed something rare. Not just the takedown of a bully, but the quiet power of dignity. And the strength of someone who refused to be made small. Tamara's voice was calm, clear, unshaken. She looked Gregory Langston straight in the eye and said, "Respect is earned by how you treat people when you think you're above them." The words dropped into the room like a hammer on glass. The silence that followed wasn't just quiet, it was heavy. Every single person in velvet and oak felt the weight of that sentence. Gregory's usual smirk, the cocky, arrogant curl of his lips that suggested he could crush anyone with a single word, vanished instantly. His eyes flickered with surprise, then confusion, then something darker. Rage? Embarrassment? For the first time that evening, he was speechless. Behind the bartender stopped pouring a glass of Pinot Noir, hand frozen mid-pour. At the next table, a couple leaned in closer, their faces rapt with attention. Even the chef, a burly man with tattooed arms who rarely left the kitchen, peeked out from the swinging doors, curiosity pulling him toward the scene unfolding in the dining room. Tamara didn't break her gaze. She took a breath and continued, her voice steady now but edged with unmistakable steel. "You think your money makes you powerful, but in this room all it's done is show how small you really are." The statement wasn't just a comeback. It was a mirror held up to Gregory's arrogance, a spotlight on the ugly truth behind his expensive suit and endless wealth. It was a reminder that power isn't measured in dollars or influence, it's measured in how you treat others. And then, without flinching, Tamara reached down and gently picked up his plate. The porterhouse steak, the very same one Gregory had raged about moments ago, was in her hands. She held it with respect, as if she was cradling something precious. But then she said the words that would echo for years to come. "I'll take this back. Someone else will serve your table from now on." The restaurant held its breath. Gregory opened his mouth, maybe to yell, maybe to demand she put the plate down, maybe to remind her who he was. But before he could say a word, the manager appeared. Daniel Cho, tall, with a calm confidence that came from years of experience, stepped beside Tamara. He was dressed in a sharp black suit, the kind that made him look like the last line of defense for the restaurant's dignity. He looked Gregory in the eye and said clearly and firmly, "Sir, we reserve the right to refuse service to anyone who disrespects our staff. You're no longer welcome here." The room erupted. Some guests whispered in shock. Others nodded quietly, satisfied that justice had been served. A few even applauded softly, their hands cupping their mouths as if afraid to break the moment. Gregory's face twisted. For a man used to having the world at his feet, being told no, especially by a waitress and a manager, was like a slap in the face. But there was no comeback left, no fiery retort, no final insult. He simply gathered his things, the weight of his ego deflating with every step. With a loud slam, the door closed behind him and the restaurant exhaled. The soft jazz returned, the conversations resumed, but the atmosphere was different. It wasn't just another Saturday night anymore. It was the night when everyone at Velvet and Oak learned something unforgettable. That dignity cannot be bought, that respect must be earned, and that one person's courage, standing tall against power and arrogance, can change everything. Tamara returned to her section. Her co-workers gathered around, offering quiet congratulations and nods of approval. The chef came out and clapped her on the back. Daniel, the manager, gave her a proud smile. But Tamara remained humble, because she knew this wasn't about winning a battle. It was about standing for something bigger, for herself, for every worker who's ever been looked down on, for everyone who's ever been told they're less because of their job, their skin, or their place in society. The story of that night spread quickly. Guests shared it online. News outlets picked it up. The hashtag, or Serve Dignity, trended on social media. And Gregory Langston? He became a cautionary tale, a reminder that money doesn't buy character. But for Tamara, the most important thing was simple. She had stood up. She had spoken her truth. And in doing so, she had reminded the world, and herself, that true power comes from respect, courage, and integrity. Gregory Langston looked around, stunned. For the first time that evening, maybe even in his entire life, he realized something crucial. The entire restaurant was watching. But it wasn't the admiring gaze he was used to commanding. There were no murmurs of support from the nearby tables. No nods of agreement. No subtle glances from those who might have whispered to each other, "Yes, that's the way to keep him in check." Instead, every pair of eyes was fixed on him, not with fear or respect, but with quiet, unmistakable judgment. He could feel the weight of their disappointment and disapproval. Gregory's mouth moved, but the words came out as a low mutter, more like a hiss of frustration than a coherent sentence. He didn't bother to argue or justify his behavior. He didn't try to win back the room. Instead, he grabbed a few bills from his wallet and threw them on the table, a pitiful attempt to buy his way out of the moment. Without waiting for a response, without sparing a glance at Tamara, he stormed out of Velvet and Oak. The door slammed shut behind him with a force that echoed through the restaurant. And then, the silence broke. A ripple of applause started. It was soft at first, just a single clap from a woman near the window. But that clap was a spark, a call to everyone who had been holding their breath. Slowly, the applause grew. From the far end of the room, more hands joined in. Guests who had been quietly watching found their voices. It swelled into a wave of sound, warm, appreciative, and genuine. The entire restaurant was clapping for Tamara. She stood quietly near the table, hands clasped in front of her, blinking back tears. Her heart was pounding. She hadn't expected this. She hadn't expected support. She had only expected to do her job and to be treated with the respect anyone deserves. But now, seeing all those faces, strangers united by one moment of justice, she felt a surge of emotion. Somewhere behind her, the chef came out from the kitchen. The tall, tattooed man wrapped his arms around her in a strong hug. His eyes were proud, almost misty. "You did good," he whispered. The restaurant manager, Daniel, approached next. He nodded at Tamara, his face glowing with quiet pride. "You showed strength tonight," he said. "Strength that inspires." Around her, the buzz of conversations returned. But the talk wasn't about the menu anymore. No one cared about the expensive steak or the perfectly paired wine. That night, people remembered something much more important. They remembered Tamara, the waitress who stood tall, the woman who spoke one sentence that froze a billionaire in his tracks, the moment that reminded everyone present of something too often forgotten: character is worth more than money. News of the incident spread quickly. Within hours, guests shared their experience on social media, posting videos and comments praising Tamara's courage. The hashtag #BombingServeDignity trended across platforms. Stories popped up in local news and national outlets, celebrating the waitress who refused to let arrogance and disrespect slide. Tamara received messages of support from people all over the country. Many said her words gave them strength to stand up in their own lives. Some shared their own stories of facing discrimination and cruelty. But for Tamara, the most important thing was that her workplace stood behind her. Velvet and Oak made it clear she had their full support, not just that night, but every night moving forward. The management announced new training programs to ensure all staff were treated with respect by guests and colleagues alike. And Gregory Langston? He became a cautionary tale. A billionaire humbled by a single sentence from a waitress. A reminder that money cannot buy respect, and that true power comes from kindness, dignity, and integrity. Months later, Tamara was promoted to a senior hostess position. She used her voice to advocate for other workers. She led workshops on confidence and respect. And every time she walked into the restaurant, she carried herself a little taller, knowing she had changed not just one night but the culture of an entire place. That night at Velvet and Oak wasn't just about a confrontation. It was about a moment of humanity shining through the noise, a reminder that sometimes all it takes to change the world, or at least one small part of it, is standing up with dignity and saying what's right. And that, my friends, is how a single moment, a single sentence, can flip the power dynamic and remind the world that no one is too rich to be kind, and no one is too small to stand tall. If this story moved you, make sure to like, subscribe, and comment below. What would you have said in Tamara's place?